In the waning days of the Third Age, when the shadow of Mordor stretched long across the lands and the hearts of the free peoples grew heavy with foreboding, there came to the borders of Lothlorien one whose very presence was as a riddle wrapped in starlight and sorrow. The Golden Woods wardens found him at the crossing of Celebdil, where the waters ran swift and clear beneath the Malern trees, and he bore no name upon his lips, though his countenance was fair, and his eyes held the wisdom of ages uncounted. The elf stood taller than most of his kindred, garbed in robes of deep blue that seemed to shift like twilight waters, and upon his brow rested no circlet of rank or lineage. His hair fell like silver moonbeams to his shoulders, and when the guards of Caras Galadon challenged him, he spoke in the ancient tongue, yet gave no name by which he might be known. "I am he who seek," said he, and his voice was as the whisper of wind through autumn leaves. "I am he who remembers what was forgotten, and I come seeking the Lady of Light, for in her mirror I must gaze, though what I shall see there may bring either salvation or doom to all the lands of Middle-earth." The guards, being wise in the ways of their people and sensing no evil in this stranger, albeit mystery hung about him like a cloak, brought him before Celeborn the Wise and Galadriel the Fair. In the heart of Caras Galadon, beneath the mighty Malern whose golden leaves sang eternal songs, the Lord and Lady of Lothlorien held counsel with the Nameless One. "Long have I walked the paths of this world," spoke the elf, bowing low before the throne of living wood. "Through Rhovanion I have wandered, across the misty mountains and down into the vale of Anduin. Yet, though I remember much of lore and wisdom, though I speak the tongues of elf and dwarf and the common speech of men, my own name has fled from me like a bird at dawn, and with it, the memory of my kindred and my home." Galadriel gazed upon him with those eyes that saw much and pierced deep, and for a long moment silence held the court, save for the eternal song of the Malern leaves above. At length she spoke, and her voice was both terrible and beautiful, like silver bells in a storm. "Nigh on 400 years have passed since last I beheld one such as you, nameless wanderer. You bear the marks of Valinor upon your spirit, yet you have never sailed the straight road. You speak of things forgotten, yet you yourself are the greatest riddle of all. Come, if you would gaze into my mirror, but know this, the waters show many things, and not all who look are gladdened by what they see." In the garden where stood the mirror of Galadriel, beneath stars that seemed to bend low to listen, the nameless elf approached the silver basin with steps both eager and afraid. The lady poured clear water from her pitcher, and lo, the surface became still as glass, reflecting not the night sky above, but visions of time and possibility. The elf gazed deep into the waters, and his fair face grew pale as moonlight on snow. For in the mirror he saw great armies marching, banners black against a crimson sky, and at their head rode one whose form was wreathed in shadow, yet whose voice he knew, though from whence that knowledge came, he could not say. "Behold," whispered the mirror's voice within his mind, "the second darkness that comes not from Mordor's fires, but from the very roots of Arda. Behold him who was cast down but not destroyed, who sleeps beneath the foundations of the earth, and stirs now in his slumber. The unnamed Lord awakens, and you alone hold the key to his prison, or his freedom." The vision shifted, and the elf saw himself standing upon a high tower of white stone, holding aloft a shard of crystal that blazed with inner fire. About the tower's base surged armies of orcs and darker things, and in the sky above wheeled the Nazgul upon their fell beasts. Yet stranger still was this. Among the defenders upon the tower's height stood figures he thought he recognized, though their faces were obscured by shadow. "Who am I?" cried the elf to the mirror's depths. "What is this shard I bear? And why do I remember its weight, though I have never held it?" But the waters grew dark and troubled, and showed no more vision. Galadriel approached, her face grave with the weight of what she had witnessed through her gift of sight. The mirror has shown you truth, wanderer, though its meaning remains shrouded. Yet this much I can tell you, your coming here was no chance, nor was your loss of memory mere accident. There are powers at work in Middle-earth, older and more terrible than Sauron's malice, and they have marked you for some purpose that fills even my heart with dread. She placed her hand upon his shoulder, and for a moment her touch brought comfort, though beneath it lay a current of fear. "You must seek the Grey Havens," said she, "and there find Círdan the shipwright, for he is eldest among the Eldar in Middle-earth, and may remember what others have forgotten. Yet go not alone, for dark roads lie ahead, and servants of the enemy are stirring. I will send with you 2 of my people, skilled in woodcraft and the ways of war." 3 figures departed Lothlorien in the grey hour before dawn, when mist hung heavy upon the celebrant, and the Malorn trees stood like silent sentinels in the gloom. With the nameless elf rode Thrandion of the Galadrim, tall and stern with keen grey eyes and bow of Malorn wood, and Nimrodel the Swift, who could run like the wind across water, and whose arrows never missed their mark. They took the path through Dunland, avoiding the more traveled roads where spies of Isengard might watch. For even then Saruman's reach was long and his servants many. Through the brown hills they rode, and the nameless elf marveled at how the land seemed to recognize his presence, as though stones and trees whispered his name, though that name remained hidden from his own hearing. On the 3rd day of their journey, as they climbed the passes that led toward Eriador, dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind brought with it the sound of hunting horns, harsh and discordant. Thrandian's face grew grim as he listened to that fell music. "Wargs," said he, knocking an arrow to his bowstring, "and by the sound of their horn, orcs from the misty mountains ride with them. We are pursued." The nameless elf felt a strange stirring within his memory, as though the sound of those horns awakened something long sleeping. His hand moved instinctively to his side, where a sword should hang, though he bore no weapon save a staff of ash wood, carved with runes that seemed to shift and change when gazed upon too long. "I remember these creatures," he said wonderingly. "Not this hunt, but others like it. I have faced orcs and wargs before, though when or where I cannot say." Down from the heights poured their pursuers, a pack of great wargs with red eyes and slavering jaws, bearing upon their backs orcs in black mail who howled with bloodlust. At their head rode one larger than the rest, whose armor was graven with the white hand of Saruman, and whose voice boomed across the hillside as he called his pack to the hunt. The 3 elves turned at bay upon a rocky tor, where ancient stones stood in a circle, worn smooth by countless years of wind and rain. As the first warg bounded up the slope, Nimrodl's arrow took it through the eye, and it fell back upon its fellows with a terrible cry. Thrandion drew his blade of elven steel, which gleamed like starlight in the gathering dusk, and prepared to sell his life dearly. But the nameless elf raised his staff high above his head, and lo, the runes upon it blazed with silver fire, and words of power came to his lips as though spoken by another's voice. The very air shimmered about the ancient stones, and the wargs drew back with whimpers of fear, for their keen senses detected something that filled them with terror. "Be gone!" cried the elf, and his voice rolled like thunder across the hills. "This place is protected by laws older than your master's mallet. Touch not these stones, lest ye be cast into darkness deeper than the pits of Utumno." The orc chieftain snarled and spurred his warg forward, raising his curved blade high. "No elf magic will protect you, Starspawn. Saruman has given us words of unbinding to counter your spell." He began to chant in the black speech, and the air grew thick and oppressive, as though a great weight pressed down upon the hilltop. Yet even as his words of unmaking filled the air, the ancient stones began to glow with a light that was neither of sun nor moon nor star, but something far older. The nameless elf felt knowledge flowing through him like water through a dry riverbed, understanding that came not from memory, but from some deeper source. He struck his staff upon the centermost stone, and the sound rang out like a bell across the hills. "Gurthanurk!" he cried in the ancient tongue. "Death to the orcs! By the power of the first music, by the light that was before the trees, I bind you to the earth you would defile." The very ground began to tremble, and from the circle of stones arose pillars of silver light that reached up to touch the storm clouds above. The wargs howled in terror and fled down the hillside, bearing their orcish riders with them, save for the chieftain who fought to control his mount, even as it bucked and reared in panic. "This is not ended, elf," snarled the orc captain. "My master knows your scent now, and his eye is upon you. The White Hand reaches far, and Saruman's servants are many. You cannot hide behind old stones forever." With that, he wheeled his warg about and galloped away into the gathering darkness, leaving the three elves alone within the circle of power. As the immediate danger passed, the light faded from the stones, and they stood once more silent and gray beneath the stormy sky. Thrandion stared at his nameless companion with wonder, and not a little fear. "What manner of elf are you, who can wake the powers of the elder days? Those stones have stood dark and silent since the fall of Erygion, yet at your word they blazed with the light of Valinor." The nameless elf sank down upon the grass, his staff trembling in his hands, for the working of such power had drained him sorely. "I know not," he whispered. "The words came to me as though spoken by another, and my hands moved as though guided by a will not my own. Yet I feel within my heart that this is but a pale shadow of what I once could do, ere some great misfortune befell me." Nimrodel knelt beside him, her keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of returning enemies. "We must leave this place," she said softly. "The orcs will return with greater numbers, and though the stones have power, I doubt they will stand against an army." Yet, as they prepared to depart, the nameless elf heard something that made him pause, a voice that seemed to come from the stones themselves, speaking in the Sindarin tongue, but with an accent that belonged to no realm of Middle-earth, he knew. "Well done, my student," the voice whispered. "You remember more than you know, though the binding upon your memory holds strong. Seek the last shore, and there perhaps you shall find the key to unlock what was sealed away. But beware, there are those who would see you never remember your true name, for with it would come power to reshape the very foundations of the world." Through the wild lands of Eriador, the three companions made their way, keeping to the deep forests and hidden paths where the shadow of Saruman's influence lay less heavily. Yet even in the ancient woods, signs of corruption were growing. Streams that ran foul and bitter, trees that stood leafless and black, though the season was yet fair, and beasts that watched them pass with eyes too bright and knowing. On the seventh day of their flight from the stone circle, as they followed a deer track through a grove of oak and ash, Nimrodel raised her hand in warning. Her keen ears had caught the sound of hoofbeats upon the road below, and the jingle of mail and harness that spoke of armed men in number. Through the trees, they saw a company of riders in the white and black livery of Isengard. Not orcs this time, but men of Dunland, who had sold their loyalty to the White Wizard for gold and promises of power. At their head rode one whose bearing spoke of noble birth gone wrong, a tall man with dark hair and cruel eyes, who wore a cloak of black wool pinned with a brooch of silver. "Grima!" breathed Thrandion, for he recognized the snake-tongued counselor of King Theoden, though what errand brought him so far from Edoras, none could say. The nameless elf felt a chill run through his bones at the sight of that pale face and those cold eyes. Within his mind stirred memories not his own, or perhaps they were his own, but from a time so distant that they seemed like the memories of another life. He saw Grima Wormtongue in the halls of Orthanc, speaking in whispers with Saruman, and heard his own name spoken between them, though even in memory, that name remained unclear. "He seeks me," the elf whispered. "This pursuit is not mere chance. Saruman knows who I am, even if I do not. See, The Dunlendings made camp in a clearing beside the road, and as the sun set behind the western hills, their voices could be heard clearly through the still air. They spoke of their quarry, an elf without name or lineage, who had escaped them at the Stone Circle, and must not be allowed to reach the Grey Haven. "My master grows impatient," said Grima in his soft, poisonous voice. "This wanderer has already caused too much delay. If he reaches Círdan and learns what Círdan knows, then all our plans may come to naught. The Palantir has shown Saruman visions of possible future, and in too many of them, this nameless one stands as a threat to everything we have worked to achieve." One of the Dunlending captains, a scarred man with gray beard and harsh features, spat into the fire. "What threat can one elf pose, my lord? Even if he reaches the havens, what can the shipbuilder do save offer him passage to the undying lands? Let him sail west and trouble us no more." Grima's laugh was like the rustle of dead leaves. "You understand nothing, fool. This is no ordinary elf, though he knows it not himself. Before his memory was taken from him, he was among the mightiest of his people, and his true name is one that even the wise speak only in whispers. Should he remember who he was, should he reclaim what was hidden from him, then neither Saruman nor any power in Middle-earth could stand against him." Aid, the elf's heart began to race, for though the words meant little to him, they stirred something deep within his spirit, a sense of vast power sleeping, like a great dragon coiled in the depths of a mountain. He felt Thrandian's hand upon his shoulder, steadying him, for his companion had seen the wild light that had kindled in his eyes. "Peace, friend," whispered the Galadrim warrior. "Whatever you were, you are yourself now, and we judge you by your deeds, not by what others say of you." To avoid the hunters of Isengard, the three companions turned north into the wild lands that lay between the Weather Hills and the Grey Havens, where few travelers dared to go. Here stood the ancient burial mounds of the Dunedain king, and the very air was thick with the weight of years and the sorrow of the dead. As they made their way between the grassy hills topped with standing stone, the nameless elf began to feel a strange resonance in his bone, as though the earth itself was calling to him. With each step, his memories seemed to grow clearer, though still they remained just beyond his grasp, like words spoken in a room beyond a closed door. "I have been here before," he said wonderingly, pausing beside a barrow whose capstone bore carvings in the ancient script of Númenor. "In this very place I stood, though it was younger then, and the kings who lie beneath these hills still walked in the sunlight." Thrandian studied the worn runes with interest, for he was learned in the lore of the Dunedain. "These stones are old indeed," he said. "If you remember them from their making, then you are far older than you appear, friend. The last king to be buried in these downs fell more than 1,000 years ago." They made camp that night in the shelter of a small copse, though none of them slept well, for the barrows seemed to whisper in the darkness, and strange lights danced upon the hilltops. The nameless elf sat apart from his companion, staring into the dying embers of their fire, and in the flickering flames he seemed to see faces, noble faces of men long dead, who looked upon him with recognition and sorrow. Near midnight, when the moon had set and the darkness was deepest, a cold mist began to rise from the barrows, and with it came a voice that froze the blood in their veins. "Who disturbs the sleep of the dead?" wailed the voice, and through the mist came walking a figure in tattered robes, whose face was hidden beneath a cowl of shadow. About its form flickered will-o'-wisps of sickly light, and where its feet touched the earth, the grass withered and died. "A Barrow-wight," breathed Nimrodel, reaching for her bow, though all knew that arrows would avail little against such a creature. But the nameless elf rose to his feet, and as he did so, his staff began to glow with soft silver light. "Hold, spirit of the mounds," he called, and his voice carried such authority that even the wight paused in its advance. "I am not come to rob the dead of their treasures, but to remember what was forgotten. You know me, creature of shadow. Look upon my face and remember the oath you swore in life. The Wight's head turned toward him, and beneath its cowl, 2 points of red light kindled like embers. For a long moment, it studied the elf's features, and then it spoke again. But now its voice was different, still cold as winter wind, but touched with a note of wonder. "Impossible," it whispered. "You are dead. I saw you fall beneath the walls of Fornost, pierced by a dozen orc spears. I myself bore your body to the House of Healing, but it was too late. Too late." The elf's heart began to pound, for in the Wight's words he heard the echo of truth, though he could not grasp its meaning. "When was this?" he asked. "What name did you call me then?" But the Wight was already beginning to fade, for the power that had bound it to the mortal world was weakening. "Find the 7 stars," it whispered as it dissolved into mist. "Find them before he does, or all is lost." The dawn brought no comfort to the companions, for the Barrow Wight's words had filled their hearts with foreboding. What were the 7 stars it had spoken of, and who was the he that must not find them first? The nameless elf felt the weight of mysteries pressing down upon him like stone, and with each riddle that was revealed, a dozen more took its place. They made good time across the downs, for the Wight's departure had cleared the air of the fell influence that haunted those hills. By evening, they had reached the borders of the Troll Shaws, where the last bridge across the Horwell still stood, though it was a place of ill repute, where few travelers cared to linger. The bridge was ancient, built in the days when Gil-galad ruled in Lindon, and the realm of Arnor was young and strong. Its stones were gray with age and stained with lichen, and the river below ran dark and swift, carrying with it the debris of the mountains and the scent of pine and snow. As they approached the bridge, Nimrodel suddenly raised her hand in warning. Her sharp eyes had caught movement in the shadows beneath the span, not the movement of water or wind, but something deliberate and malign. "Trolls?" she whispered. "Stone trolls, by their size and the way they move. 3 of them at least, and they block our path." The nameless elf studied the bridge with eyes that seemed to see more than mortal sight should allow. "They are not here by chance," he said slowly. "Someone has set them to watch this crossing, to prevent us from reaching the Grey Haven. But who commands trolls with such purpose?" His question was answered soon enough, for from the far side of the bridge came a figure robed in gray, bearing a staff not unlike the elf's own, but darker and twisted, as though carved from the wood of trees that had grown in poisoned soil. The figure threw back its hood, revealing a face that might once have been fair, but was now marked by shadow and malice. "I am Radagast, the Brown no longer," spoke the fallen wizard, and his voice was like the rustling of dead leaves. "I serve new masters now, and they have tasked me with stopping you here, nameless wanderer. Your journey ends at this bridge, and your questions shall remain forever unanswered." The trolls stirred at their master's words, lumbering up from beneath the bridge, with eyes like glowing coals and claws that could rend stone. Yet even as they advanced, the nameless elf felt power stirring within him. Not the gentle strength he had called upon at the ancient stones, but something far more dangerous, like lightning held in check by will alone. "Radagast," he said sadly, "once you were wise among the Istari, friend to all growing things. What corruption has brought you to this pass?" The brown wizard's laugh was bitter as wormwood. "Corruption? Nay, I have seen clearly at last. The music of creation was flawed from its beginning, and only by serving the true power that lies beneath all things can we hope to correct those errors. Saruman offered me knowledge, and I took it gladly. Now I offer you the same choice. Serve the White Council that shall be, or die upon this bridge." The elf's grip tightened upon his staff, and for a moment the air crackled with power barely restrained. "I have heard such words before," he said, and there was something in his tone that made even the trolls hesitate. "In halls of stone and corridors of crystal, I have heard the proud speak of remaking the world according to their will. It ended badly then, and it shall end badly now." The first troll charged with a roar that echoed off the hills, its great stone club raised high above its head. Thrandion met it with his blade, the elven steel ringing like a bell as it struck the creature's rocky hide. But though his stroke was true, it barely scratched the monster's skin. Nimrodel danced between the second troll's grasping claws, her arrows finding the spaces between its stony plates. Yet still it came on, seemingly immune to pain or fear. Only when her shaft found the soft spot at the base of its throat did it stumble and fall, crashing to the bridge with a sound like a rock slide. But it was the nameless elf who commanded the battle's heart, for he stood in the bridge's center facing Radagast the Fallen, and between them crackled energies that made the very air burn with their passage. The corrupted wizard raised his staff, and from its twisted head shot forth bolts of sickly green fire, while the elf countered with pure silver light that sang as it flew. "You remember more than you pretend," snarled Radagast as their powers clashed and sparked between them. "I can see it in your eyes, the knowledge creeping back like water through a cracked dam. You were there, weren't you? In the music that shaped the world. You stood in the timeless halls when Iluvatar spoke the word that set all things in motion." The elf's eyes widened, for in those words he heard an echo of truth that resonated in his very bone. Images flashed through his mind, vast halls beyond the circles of the world, figures of light gathered in councils beyond counting, and at the center of all, a presence too bright and terrible to behold directly. "I remember," he whispered, and with that admission, power flooded through him like a dam-burst river. The staff in his hands blazed with starfire, and when he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from the foundations of creation itself. "By the secret fire, by the flame of Anor, I unmake your corruption. Radagast of the many colors, return to the path you abandoned, or be cast out from this realm forever." The light that erupted from his staff was blinding, and when it faded, the brown wizard lay sprawled upon the bridge, his staff shattered and his robes smoking. But he was not destroyed. Rather, the shadow seemed to have been burned from him, leaving behind a broken figure who wept as he looked upon what he had become. "Forgive me," whispered Radagast, and his voice was his own again, cleansed of the corruption that had claimed him. "I sought only to heal the hurts that men had dealt to the growing things, but in my desperation, I turned to powers that promised swift solutions. I forgot that evil means can never bring about good ends, no matter how noble the intention." Aridiut, the remaining troll, bereft of their master's control, had reverted to their natural stupidity and were already wandering back beneath the bridge, seeking the darkness they loved. The crisis had passed, but the nameless elf stood trembling, for the power he had unleashed had awakened something within him that both exhilarated and terrified him. "What am I?" he asked the sky above, but only wind answered him, carrying the scent of the sea that lay still many leagues ahead. It was in the gray hour before dawn, when the three companions first glimpsed the towers of Mithlond rising above the Gulf of Lune, their white stones gleaming like stars reflected in still water. Ships lay at anchor in the harbor, vessels of such beauty that mortal eyes could scarce take in their form, built not for war or commerce, but for the one journey that knew no return. At the harbor's edge stood Círdan the shipwright, oldest of all the Eldar, who remained in Middle-earth, his long gray beard touched with foam from the eternal wave. He did not seem surprised to see them come walking down the harbor road in the early light, for his eyes were keen with the wisdom of ages, and he had long prepared for this meeting. "Welcome, wanderer without a name," said Círdan, and his voice was like the sound of waves upon a distant shore. "Long have I awaited your coming, though I feared it might be too late. The time draws near when all things must be revealed, and the choices made in the elder days will at last bear their final fruit." The nameless elf approached the ancient shipwright with steps that grew heavier with each pace, for he sensed that here, at last, he would learn truths that might prove more terrible than ignorance. "Lord Círdan," he said, bowing low, "I come seeking knowledge of myself, for my memories are locked away beyond my reach, and all Middle-earth seems to know my name, save only I myself." Círdan nodded slowly, his ageless face grave with sorrow and wisdom. "Come," he said, "walk with me upon the shore, where the waves sing the songs they learned before the raising of the sun and moon. There I will tell you such of your story as can be safely spoken. Though I warn you, knowledge, once gained, cannot be forgotten, and you may find that ignorance was a kinder master than truth." They walked together upon the gray sand, where the endless waves rolled in from the undying lands, carrying with them whispers of Valinor and the light of the two trees that once illuminated the blessed realm. Behind them followed Thrandion and Nimrodel, and Radagast the Penitent, for the brown wizard had sworn to aid them in whatever way he could, seeking redemption for his fall to shadow. "In the days of the music," began Círdan, his words keeping time with the rhythm of the waves, "when Ilúvatar set the Ainur to sing the themes that would become the world, there was among them one whose voice was pure and strong, who sang not of dominion or glory, but of memory itself, the preservation of all that was good and fair, against the corruption that Melkor would bring." The elf's heart began to race, for in those words he heard the echo of a vast music that seemed to resonate in his very bone. "That voice belonged to you, though the name you bore then cannot be spoken in the tongues of Middle-earth. You were not the mightiest of the Valar, nor the wisest, but your gift was perhaps the most precious of all, the power to preserve what was, to hold safe the memories of better days against the darkness that would swallow them." "But I am no Vala," protested the elf. "I am of the firstborn, flesh and blood and spirit, bound to Middle-earth." Círdan smiled sadly. "Indeed, you are of the Eldar now, for when the music ended and the vision was shown, you chose to enter the world as part of its story, rather than to rule over it from afar. You took the form of the firstborn and dwelt among them, becoming their teacher and their keeper of lore, though your true nature was hidden even from yourself as the ages passed. Upon a strand swept by eternal winds, where the gray sand met waters that reflected the light of the undying lands, Círdan led the nameless elf to a cave hollowed from the living rock by countless tides. Within that cavern, protected by wards both ancient and powerful, rested treasures beyond price, not gold or gems, but memories crystallized into physical form, saved against the day when they would be needed most. "Behold," said Círdan, lifting from a niche carved in the stone wall a shard of crystal that blazed with inner light, the Elessar of memory, wrought in the days when the world was young by your own hand. Within this stone lies preserved the knowledge that was hidden from you, the name that was taken, and the power that was sealed away for your own protection." The elf reached out toward the crystal with trembling fingers, but Círdan stayed his hand with a gentle touch. "Know this first," warned the shipwright, "for once you touch the Elessar, there can be no return to ignorance. You will remember all, your true nature, your purpose in the music of creation, and the terrible burden that was placed upon you in the elder days. You will recall why your memory was hidden and what dark fate you chose to accept, rather than see the world burn in the fires of the last war." "And what was that fate?" asked the elf, though his heart already whispered the answer. "To become the guardian of the final seal," replied Círdan heavily, "to bind yourself to Middle-earth as its ultimate protector, charged with preventing the awakening of the unnamed one who lies bound beneath the roots of the mountains." For Melkor was not the first to rebel against the music, though he was the most prideful. Before him came another, whose name was stricken from all songs and whose very existence was hidden from history. The waves crashed against the cavern's mouth with unusual force, as though the sea itself recoiled from the speaking of such truths. This unnamed one fell not through pride or malice, but through despair. Despair at the flaws he perceived in the music. Despair at the suffering that seemed woven into the very fabric of existence. He sought to unmake all that was and begin anew, to create a world without pain or loss or the passage of time. And you, in your love for the music as it was sung, stood against him. The elf's mind reeled as fragmented memories began to surface. Vast battles fought not with sword and flame, but with song and silence. A figure of terrible beauty, whose voice could unravel the threads of reality itself, and his own desperate choice to bind both their fates together rather than see all of Arda destroyed. "I sealed him away," he whispered, understanding flooding through him like bitter wine, "and myself with him, setting a watch that could never end, a guard that could never sleep." But the binding was incomplete. Some part of my memory, my power, had to be hidden away, lest the very strength needed to maintain the prison also provide the key to break it. Círdan nodded sadly. "And now that seal weakens, as all things must in the turning of the ages, the unnamed one stirs in his prison, and his servants work to free him. They know that only you possess the knowledge needed to break the bonds that hold him. But they know also that you must remember your true self to use that knowledge. Thus, they seek to destroy you while you remain ignorant, before you can choose how to use your power." The elf stared at the crystal shard that held his stolen memories, understanding at last the full weight of the choice before him. To remain as he was meant safety but ignorance, leaving Middle-earth defenseless when the final crisis came. To reclaim his memories meant power and knowledge, but also the terrible responsibility of determining the world's fate. "And if I remember," he asked quietly, "what then? Can the seal be renewed, or must I choose between freeing my ancient enemy and remaining bound to him forever?" Círdan's ancient eyes held depths of sorrow that even the elf could not fathom. "That choice, my friend, is yours alone to make. But know this, the music of creation was not flawed, as the unnamed one believed. Its beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage of those who continue to sing their parts despite the discord that surrounds them." The crystal shard felt warm against the elf's palm, like sunlight captured in stone, and the moment his fingers closed around it, memory crashed through him like a wave breaking against the shore. He was no longer merely an elf without a name, but Eonwy the Herald, greatest of the Maiar save only the Valor themselves, voice of Manwë, and guardian of the music's memory. With that knowledge came pain beyond description, for he remembered now the full weight of what he had sacrificed. To maintain the prison that held the unnamed one, who had once been called Almariel the Maker, most beloved of all who stood before the throne of Iluvatar, he had bound his own fate to that of his fallen brother, becoming both jailer and fellow prisoner. For 3,000 years of Middle-earth, he had wandered with his memories sealed, maintaining the watch without understanding what he guarded. While deep beneath the roots of the mountains, his ancient foe lay dreaming of freedom and revenge. But now the dreams were becoming action, and servants of the unnamed one moved across the world, seeking to break the bonds that held their master. "The 7 stars," he gasped, understanding flooding through him, "the constellation that marks the key points of the binding. They are not stars in the sky, but artifacts hidden across Middle-earth, each one a pillar that supports the prison's walls." Círdan nodded gravely. 3 have already been found and broken by the enemy's servants. The star crystal of Numenor lies shattered in the ruins of Osgiliath. The moonstone of Gil-galad was taken from Rivendell by spies who came as traders. The sunblade of Elendil was stolen from its resting place in the tombs of Minas Tirith. 4 remain then, said Eonwë, and his voice carried now the authority of one who had stood in the presence of the Creator himself. The Earth Song crystal in the depths of Moria, the Seasung pearl in the underwater halls of Círdan's making, the tree song amber that grows still in the heart of Fangorn, and the star song sapphire that rests in the tower of Barad-dûr, hidden where Sauron himself knows not of its presence. Even now, continued Círdan, servants of the Unnamed One march toward Moria, seeking to claim the Earth Song crystal. If they succeed, only 3 pillars will remain, and the prison will begin to crack. When 6 are broken, nothing will hold our ancient enemy, and he will rise to finish what he began in the Elder Days, the unmaking of all creation. Eonwë felt the weight of eons settle upon his shoulders, but with it came also a clarity he had not known since his memories were sealed. He was what he had always been, guardian and protector, keeper of the music's harmony against all discord. "Then we must reach Moria first," he declared, and as he spoke, light began to emanate from his form, the radiance of his true nature shining through the elven flesh that was now merely a vessel for his spirit. "I call upon all who would preserve the world to stand with me in this final hour. The road to the lonely mountain leads through the darkest paths, but we shall not walk them alone." Behind him, Thrandion and Nimrodel knelt, understanding at last that they stood in the presence of one of the powers of the world. But Radagast the Brown stepped forward, his staff now glowing with clean light. "I will come," said the wizard simply. "I have much to atone for, and perhaps in this quest I may find redemption." From the harbor came the sound of footsteps upon stone, and turning, they saw other figures approaching. Warriors of Rivendell led by Elrond himself, rangers of the Dunedain with grim faces and ready blades, and at their head, one whose presence made even Eonwë pause in wonder. "Gandalf," breathed Círdan, "I thought you had sailed west." The Grey Wizard smiled, though his eyes were grave with foreknowledge of the trials ahead. "I came back," he said simply, "for though my errand in Middle-earth was complete, I found I could not rest while such darkness threatened the world I had come to love. The boats of Círdan can sail many roads, not all of them across water. The paths to Moria led through shadows deep and treacherous, where the very stones seemed to whisper warnings of the doom that lay ahead. The company that set out from the Grey Havens was small but mighty. Eonwë bearing his true power at last, Gandalf walking in the full majesty of his office as Mithrandir the White, Elrond whose wisdom was matched only by his compassion, and a dozen others whose hearts were pure and whose courage was beyond question. They found the ancient realm of Durin's folk empty and echoing, its halls filled with shadows and the memory of drums in the deep. But they were not the first to arrive at the chamber of Khazad-dûm, where the Earth-song crystal pulsed with green fire in the heart of a pillar that supported the very foundations of the mountain. Dark figures moved in the crystal's light, orcs of a breed more terrible than any seen before, their forms twisted by powers older than Morgoth's malice, and at their head stood one whose presence made the air itself recoil. This was no mere lieutenant of evil, but a Maia fallen beyond all hope of redemption, whose name had been stricken from the records of the wise. "Welcome, brother," spoke the fallen one, and his voice was like the sound of stars dying in the void. "How long I have waited for you to remember yourself. Now you may witness the completion of our master's work, and the beginning of the true world that shall replace this flawed creation." Eonwë stepped forward, and as he did, his form began to change, revealing at last the majesty that was his by right. Wings of light spread from his shoulders, and his voice carried the harmony of the music itself as he replied, "I come not as your brother, Longorthin, the traitor, but as the herald of the one who made us all. Your master's dream of unmaking is a lie born of despair, and I will not permit it to come to pass." The battle that followed shook the very roots of the mountain, for powers that had not been unleashed since the Elder Days clashed in the deep places of the earth. Light and darkness warred in forms beyond mortal comprehension, while around them the lesser members of each host fought with blade and bow and spell. But even as the conflict raged, Eonwë came to understand a truth that filled his heart with both sorrow and hope. The Earth-song crystal was not merely a seal holding the unnamed one in bondage. It was also a key that could transform the prison into something else entirely. With that understanding came a choice that only he could make. He could renew the binding, ensuring that Almariel remained trapped beneath the earth for another age of the world. Or he could do something that had never been attempted before, offer his ancient enemy the chance to return to the music, not as the maker he had been, but as the guardian he might yet become. Standing before the crystal, with his friends battling the forces of darkness around him, Eonwe raised his voice in a song that had not been heard since the world's making. It was a melody of forgiveness and redemption, of love that persisted despite betrayal, and of hope that could kindle even in the deepest despair. The Earth Song crystal blazed with light that was neither harsh nor blinding, but warm as summer sunlight on growing thing. And in that light, a figure began to form, not the twisted shadow that Almariel had become, but something new, created from the harmony of two voices singing as one. "Choose," said Eonwe to the figure in the light. "Return to the music as you were meant to be, and let us heal together the discord that has poisoned both our songs." For a moment that stretched into eternity, the fate of all creation hung in the balance. Then the figure in the light smiled, and when he spoke, his voice carried the joy of one who has found his way home after long wandering in darkness. "I choose the music," said Almariel the Redeemed, "and I choose to sing it with my brother, as we should have done from the beginning." The Earth Song crystal shattered, but instead of releasing forces that would destroy the world, it sent forth waves of healing that spread through all the foundations of Middle-earth. The other star crystals, wherever they lay, hidden or broken, blazed with answering light, and the prison that had held both jailer and prisoner for so long became instead a harmony that would guard the world not through bondage but through love. And in the halls of Khazad-dûm, as the forces of darkness fled before the light of redemption, Eonwe the Herald embraced Almariel the Maker, and their song rose up to join the music of the spheres, where it echoes still in the turning of the stars and the changing of the seasons, a melody of hope that will endure until the end of all day. Thus ends the tale of the elf without a name, who was revealed to be greater than any had dreamed, and whose choice to offer forgiveness rather than vengeance saved not only Middle-earth, but the very fabric of creation itself. For in the end, it was not power that triumphed over darkness, but love, the love that moves the sun and stars, and that can heal even the deepest wounds of time.